My name is Helen Warren. I am 70 years old, and 10 minutes ago my daughter-in-law shoved me against a marble wall in front of half the courthouse. Her name is Clara Warren, 38, perfectly dressed, perfectly cruel. She called me a filthy old woman, an embarrassment to the family. Her voice echoed down the long corridor lined with attorneys, clerks, and guards. For a moment the world seemed to stop. Papers froze midair, heels stopped clicking, and silence grew heavy around us. My son, David, stood a few feet away, staring at the floor, pretending not to see. His hands were buried in his pockets like he was waiting for the storm to pass. But I was the storm, and neither of them knew it yet. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply steadied myself against the wall, and looked at Clara, this young woman who had married my son, who believed power was something worn on high heels and painted on with lipstick. People watched. Some looked disgusted, others whispered. I lowered my head, adjusted my beige sweater, and said nothing. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was the kind of woman who could be humiliated without fighting back. Inside I was counting. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes everything would change. Clara turned away with her head high, her designer bag swinging at her side. David followed, not even glancing back. I waited until they disappeared through the courthouse doors before I moved. Instead of going home, I walked through the side entrance, the one only employees use, the one that leads to the judge's chambers. For 30 years I served in this very building. For 30 years I wore the black robe, delivered verdicts, and watched people beg for mercy or truth. But when I retired, I never told my family. I wanted to be just Mom, not Judge Warren. I thought if I became smaller, simpler, easier to love, they would love me more. I was wrong. I reached the private hallway. A clerk recognized me and smiled. "Judge Warren, are you ready for today's hearing?" she asked. "Yes," I said, smoothing my gray hair, "more than ready." Outside that courtroom, Clara believed she had won. Inside, she was about to learn who I really was. And when the bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise," the woman she called a filthy old embarrassment would be the one sitting behind the bench. All rise. Before that morning in the courthouse, I used to believe silence was a form of love. When my husband died of a heart attack, David was only 15. We had bills stacked high, a mortgage, and no one to lean on. At night, while he slept, I studied law at the kitchen table. I read case files under a dim lamp, my fingers stained with ink, my coffee always cold by midnight. I promised myself that no matter how hard life became, I would give my son a better future. And I did. By 42, I had earned my seat on the bench. The courtroom became my second home, a place where I made sense of the chaos people brought before me. But I never bragged. I never told David that the woman who packed his lunches was also the woman who decided the fate of others every day. To him, I was just Mom. Years later, when he became a lawyer, I thought he'd be proud of me if he knew. But then came Clara. I still remember the first time she came to dinner. Black dress, red nails, that polished confidence that fills a room and leaves no air for anyone else. She looked at my modest home the way someone looks at an outdated museum, polite but detached. She called my mashed potatoes quaint and smiled like it was a compliment. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself she just needed time to adjust. But time only sharpened her contempt. Each visit after that came with a new list of criticisms. You should repaint the walls. You should get rid of these old curtains. You should try a new hairstyle. She said the word should like it was a command, and David never corrected her. He sat quietly on the couch checking his phone, nodding absently while I smiled through the sting of her words. I kept thinking if I just stay gentle, if I don't cause trouble, they'll keep me in their lives. But I was wrong. The more invisible I made myself, the more they acted like I didn't exist. When my granddaughters were born, I thought things would change. I baked cookies, bought gifts, sent cards. I waited for the chance to read them bedtime stories, to hear them call me grandma. But Clara always had an excuse: birthday parties I wasn't invited to, family dinners for close friends only. I once stood outside their house with a gift in my hands, listening to laughter from behind the door. Clara smiled sweetly and said, "Helen, we didn't plan for extra guests. The girls barely know you." She closed the door before I could answer. That night, as I walked home alone, I told myself I didn't need their approval. But deep down I still hoped they would see me someday. Not as a burden, not as a nuisance, just as their family. I was wrong again, and soon life would prove it. It happened by accident. David stopped by my house one afternoon, saying he needed some old insurance papers from his father's files. He looked distracted, glancing at his watch every few minutes. His phone buzzed constantly on the table, and when he finally went into the study, he left it behind. The screen lit up with a new message. Out of habit, I turned my eyes toward it, and that single glance changed everything. It was from Clara. I spoke with the lawyer, the message read. Once we declare her incompetent, we can sell the house. It's worth $200,000. She won't even notice once she's in a nursing home. My body went cold. I read the message again and again, thinking maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was a cruel joke hidden between the lines. But there wasn't. Every word was deliberate, sharp, and final. They wanted to erase me. That house had been my life, where David learned to ride his bike, where I studied through sleepless nights, where I kept every photo, every memory, every piece of myself. To them, it was just property. To me, it was proof that I had built something out of nothing. When David came back, I was pouring coffee. My voice didn't tremble. "Here you go, sweetheart, don't be late." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and left. The moment the door closed, I sank into a chair, holding the cup like it was the only solid thing left. My son was planning to lock me away, and I had just smiled at him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, staring at the quiet shadows of my home. I thought of the hundreds of people I had judged in court: criminals, liars, manipulators, and realized that the greatest betrayal often comes dressed in love. By sunrise, I had stopped shaking. I knew exactly what to do. If they wanted to play the law against me, they had chosen the wrong opponent. I spent 30 years learning how justice works, and now I would use every ounce of that knowledge to protect myself. They thought I was an old woman with no fight left in her. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years: Marcus Lee. 2 decades ago, I'd been the presiding judge on his fraud case. The evidence against him was weak, the prosecution sloppy. I spent weeks reviewing the files myself and found proof of his innocence. When I acquitted him, he promised he'd never forget what I'd done. He kept that promise. When I called, his voice sounded surprised but warm. "Judge Warren, it's been a long time. What can I do for you?" "Marcus," I said quietly, "I need your help. And this time it's personal." We met in his office that same afternoon. I told him everything: Clara's message, David's silence, the years of humiliation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his pen tapping lightly on the desk. When I finished, he leaned forward. "They can't declare you incompetent without evidence," he said. "But we won't wait for them to try. We'll build a wall they can't climb." Over the next few weeks, that's exactly what we did. He arranged psychological evaluations, memory tests, medical assessments. Each result came back clear. My mind was sharp, my decision-making intact. I kept every certificate, every signed document in a folder labeled "for the record." Then we wrote my will. David would remain my heir, but under strict conditions. He could not sell my home without my consent, could not access a single dollar until after my death, and if he ever attempted to manipulate the will, he would lose everything. Marcus also hired a private investigator, a quiet man who didn't ask unnecessary questions. Within days, the evidence started piling up. Clara had been embezzling from her own firm, small transfers at first, then tens of thousands disappearing into shadow accounts. She had also forged David's signature on a second mortgage, using their home as collateral for her personal debts. Marcus slid the papers across the table to me one evening. "She's drowning in debt, Judge. Your house was her lifeline." I looked at the evidence and felt no rage, no tears, only clarity. For 30 years, I had watched people destroy themselves with greed and arrogance. Now it was happening inside my own family. And I was done being the silent victim. It was time to let them see who they were dealing with. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me with a quiet excitement in his voice. "You won't believe this, Judge," he said. "Your daughter-in-law, Clara Warren, is scheduled to represent a major client in court next Tuesday. It's a big case, $500,000 at stake. And guess who's been asked to fill in as a visiting judge for that very hearing?" I didn't have to guess. For the first time in months, I smiled, not out of vengeance but out of calm purpose. "Send me the case file," I said. "I'll be ready." The morning of the hearing, I dressed simply: beige sweater, black slacks, flat shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they remembered me, harmless, forgettable. I arrived early, standing near the courthouse steps, watching lawyers rush by. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished marble. Then I saw them. David in his tailored gray suit, phone in hand, and behind him, Clara, her heels clicking sharply on the stone floor, her confidence unshakable. She noticed me before he did. Her expression hardened. "Helen," she said, her tone sharp, "what are you doing here?" I smiled gently. "Good morning, Clara. Good luck with your case." Suspicion flickered in her eyes. "How do you know about my case?" Before I could answer, she stepped closer, her fingers gripping my arm. "Did you come here to embarrass us? To make a scene?" Her voice rose, drawing stares from the hallway. "Clara," I said softly, "let go of me." But she didn't. "You always show up where you don't belong. Always in the way." She shoved me once more, not hard but enough for me to feel the cold wall against my back. David's voice came from behind her. "Clara, let's go, we're late." She gave me one last glare. "You really don't know when to disappear, do you?" They walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. For a moment, I let the sting of humiliation settle into my bones. Then I straightened my sweater and walked toward the side door, the one reserved for judges. Patricia, my old courtroom clerk, met me halfway. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Judge Warren," she whispered, "are you sure you're ready for this?" "More than ready," I said. Inside the private chamber, I changed into the black robe hanging in the closet, my name embroidered inside the collar, Helen Warren, Judge, Courtroom 3. The fabric was heavy, familiar like armor I had once laid down but was finally taking up again. When I walked into the courtroom, the hum of conversation quieted. Lawyers shuffled papers, witnesses whispered, and Clara sat in the front row, laughing softly with her assistant, unaware of who was about to walk in. I took the side entrance and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the bench. The clerk stood and announced, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Helen Warren presiding. Clara's head jerked up. For a second, she didn't understand. Then realization hit her. Her face went pale, her mouth opened but no words came out. The papers slipped from her hand and scattered on the floor. David's chair scraped loudly as he stood. His expression was one of pure disbelief. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply adjusted my glasses and said, "Please be seated." The room obeyed. The sound of chairs creaking filled the silence. "Case number 2025037, I began. Plaintiff, Harborview Construction. Defendant, Langford Urban Developments. Attorney for the plaintiff, Clara Warren. Attorney for the defense, Michael Torres. Are both sides ready to proceed?" The defense attorney stood immediately. "Ready, Your Honor." Clara hesitated, her voice trembling. "Why, yes, Your Honor." I met her eyes briefly, then looked back to my notes. For the next hour, she stumbled through her arguments, misreading clauses, citing the wrong sections, fumbling through evidence she hadn't organized. Each time she erred, I corrected her calmly, professionally, just as I would any other lawyer. "This court expects accuracy, Attorney Warren," I said at one point, my tone steady. When the recess was called, she was shaking. David had already left the room, face pale as parchment. I sat there behind the bench, my hands folded, my heart steady. Justice wasn't loud, it didn't scream, it simply waited for the right moment to be heard. By the next morning, the entire courthouse was talking. A retired judge had returned for a single hearing, a young attorney had fallen apart under pressure, and the twist everyone whispered about the judge was her mother-in-law. The local paper ran a headline that afternoon, "Retired Judge Presides Over Case Against Her Own Family." They called it poetic justice. I didn't correct them. Justice isn't poetry, it's truth stripped bare. When I got home, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Former colleagues, reporters, even students from the law school wanted a statement. I gave none. The only thing I said was, the law spoke for itself. Across town, Clara was unraveling. The recording of the hearing circulated through the firm. Everyone heard her stammer. Everyone saw her mistakes. Clients began to withdraw, quietly at first, then all at once. Within a week, the woman who had once bragged about her perfect record was drowning in shame. Meanwhile, Marcus brought me another folder, one thick with evidence. Bank transfers, forged signatures, credit card statements. "It's all here," he said. "Fraud, embezzlement, and falsified contracts. Enough to end her career permanently." I studied the papers in silence. We'll hold it, I said finally. Not yet. He looked surprised. Why not? Because this isn't about destroying her. It's about teaching them what real accountability looks like. He nodded slowly. He understood. A few days later, David came to see me. He looked older, tired, like someone who'd been living in a house made of glass and finally realized it was cracking. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who you were. Or who she really was." I didn't hug him. "Not yet. You didn't ask, David," I said quietly. "You never asked who I was. You never wanted to know." He sat down, head in his hands. "I thought you wanted to be simple, ordinary." "I wanted peace," I said. "But peace built on silence is just another kind of prison." He looked up at me then, eyes full of regret. "What are you going to do?" I took a breath. Nothing reckless, just the truth. I'll let our lies collapse under their own weight. And they did, slowly, inevitably, like a building with no foundation. It took almost 2 weeks before David came back. I heard the knock on the door early one morning, just as I was watering the fern by the window. For a moment I considered not answering. But then I saw his silhouette through the glass, shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled, a man who looked nothing like the confident attorney I'd raised. When I opened the door, he held up a newspaper. My face was on the front page again. "You didn't tell me," he said, his voice trembling. "You never told me you were a judge." "I tried," I answered softly, "but you never wanted to hear." He stepped inside, looking around the house as though seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the old family photos, the framed certificates, the law books lining the shelves. "Clara said you were losing your memory. She said you needed help." I nodded slowly. She was half right. I did need help, just not the kind she offered. He sat down on the couch, burying his face in his hands. "She forged my signature, didn't she? Marcus showed me everything." "Yes," I said, "but what hurts more is that you didn't ask before believing her." Tears welled up in his eyes. I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to lose my family. "Peace," I said quietly, "isn't silence, David. It's truth that doesn't have to scream." For the first time in years, he looked at me, really looked. The guilt in his face was almost unbearable. "What do I do now?" he whispered. "You do what's right," I said. "Start there." He nodded. Later that week, he filed for divorce and turned in the evidence of Clara's fraud. When he came back again, it wasn't to apologize, it was to bring my granddaughters. They ran through the door laughing, their voices echoing through the house like sunlight. For the first time in a long while, the place felt like home again. Months passed, and the noise around the case slowly faded. The newspapers found new scandals, new faces to chase. But for me, the silence that followed was not emptiness, it was peace. I returned to the courthouse once a week, not as a judge this time, but as a mentor for young clerks. I'd walk through the same hallways where my story had begun, hearing the faint echo of those words, "all rise," and feeling something inside me lift every time. David visited often now. He brought the girls on weekends, sometimes just for pancakes, sometimes to sit in the garden while I told them stories from the old days. The girls loved hearing that Grandma once wore a robe and sent bad people to jail. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, the younger one, Lily, asked, "Grandma, were you scared when you had to be brave?" I smiled. "Every single time," I said. "Courage doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you act anyway." David reached across the table, took my hand, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at him and said, "You were never the enemy, David. You were just lost." As the sun began to set, I thought about all the years I had tried to be smaller, softer, quieter, easier to love. And I realized something simple but profound: when you shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort, you disappear from your own life. I had spent too long living in that kind of silence. Now, I spoke when something mattered. I stood when something was unjust, and I loved myself enough to never let anyone decide my worth again. The world still saw me as an old woman. That was fine. Let them underestimate me. It was easier that way. Because when life tries to corner you, when others try to silence you, the only thing left to do is stand tall inside and out, and remind them that dignity never retires. All rise.